Hello there, my name's Card. I'm a long-time progressive community organiser and activist, and I've also been making videos here on my YouTube page about a range of topics as a hobby for a while now. A few months ago, I did two videos talking about the proposition of some that self-described involuntary celibates, or incels, are or ought to be considered some sort of political bloc or beleaguered demographic. And how, in short, I think that's nonsense. I wouldn't put any stock in or want to waste much time litigating. But shortly after I made those videos, to my surprise, someone out there who runs a channel called EdgierThanThou, of all things, took the time to make a video responding to those ideas of mine. I disagree quite a bit with their video, but it was very respectfully made and quite articulate. So I've been contemplating making this response to their video for a little while now, and I think now's as good a time as any to have a go at doing that. Also, for the sake of transparency and even-handedness, I'll be linking their video and channel in the description, because that's always good practice when you're doing this sort of thing. If you didn't see, or don't recall, the original videos I did on this topic, the main actionable idea of my position was that, owing in large part to how incorrect the incel worldview is, and how so many of their problems are basically self-inflicted or illusory, I'm not particularly interested in trying to help them. And in spite of their username, EdgierThanThou takes a much more kind, sympathizing position. First, they approach the argument by putting a lot of emphasis on how incels' quasi-political worldview is shaped by material and cultural factors outside of their own control. Here's a short clip where they're responding to me to make that point. This is a general idea among a lot of left-wing people, especially online left-wing commentators, and it's become a straightforward explanation for many as to why incels have become a thing as of late.
I'd argue it's a bit more complicated than that, but generally, yes. Incels as a social phenomenon have become more prevalent as a result of men becoming more socially alienated, of them struggling to healthily adjust to changing technology, and far-right organizations using that alienation and unhealthy adjustment to turn them into pawns, appealing to their frustrations and giving them quick and easy answers that lead to horrifying ends.
I appreciate that a lot of this stuff is framed as an explanation, not a justification. And my interlocutor here goes on to explain that while being an incel is bad, how, in their view, it's not necessarily something that should be looked down upon, in a sense, by those of us on the progressive left. I don't want to put words in their mouth here, but it sounds like they're angling for more of a pro-rehabilitation approach to the incel problem. More outreach, less open mockery. Good idea in theory. But what I see as more important here is an acknowledgement that in any sort of real-life organising, fixing committed incels is really difficult, and your time, energy, and resources are all very limited. It's one thing to have all the stock lefty arguments ready to go if you want to get into an online debate with one of these people, so you can tell them exactly why they're wrong. But it's a whole different ballgame to try and get them to straighten out their priorities for good in real life. And that's also assuming you're the kind of mask-presenting, confident-sounding, sex-having sort of person that they might just listen to. Heaven forbid you're ever a woman trying to fix these people, because they sure as hell won't listen to you. And I would never endanger any of the lefty organiser women I know by telling them to try. Unfortunately, we can't change a lot of the material terrain or the conditions of incels' lives. All we can do, as online commentators here, is figure out how to try to respond when we see them. And if you do take the next, very commendable step forward of trying to be a real-life progressive organiser, the most you can do then is figure out how you want to deal with these people's politics in your org or in your work. And sometimes, frankly, most of the time, you just gotta prioritise your effort elsewhere. I don't think incels are anywhere near the top of the list of priorities. And as to the argument that your political and social views are shaped by your circumstances, that's very true. But I still don't believe that means we owe incels that much sympathy or any sort of high priority position on the list of itemized people most deserving of our help. To that sort of end, I'll just voice a particular belief of mine that's relevant here. Although your material circumstances do obviously influence your beliefs, you still basically choose how to act. Here's a pretty extreme analogy, but I think it gets the point across. Suppose you're born the son of a well-to-do, slave-holding family in the American South in the 1820s. You're born into a position of immense power and privilege in a highly racist, very hierarchical society. And through no real fault of your own, the material circumstances of your life mean you'd almost certainly grow up to be really racist, just by default. No surprise there. But racism is still bad. I still think it's a bad thing to have the views of a 19th century slave owner, even if it's because you are a 19th century slave owner. See, maybe any given incel didn't exactly choose to be a sexless, entitled reprobate, but I still don't have any sympathy. Being an incel is still bad. The incel might be that way because he was most likely born right at the end of the tail end of the 20th century into a Western culture that still denigrates men's lack of sexual experience, right as women were, by and large, starting to get just enough bodily autonomy that they no longer have to put out for the first man that offers their father a dowry anymore. And reactionary grievance culture has turned his anger towards that situation, towards the woman themselves. You're right if you say that every incel is an incel for a reason, but I still don't like them, or what they think, or how they act. Your beliefs are, in very large part, shaped by the completely arbitrary and effectively random circumstances of your birth, but you're still responsible for what you believe and say and do. If you, the generic you, the viewer, happen to do outreach to these people in good faith, I say sincerely good on you. If you think that's a good use of your time, go right ahead. I just don't think it's a good use of my time, so I won't be doing it, and I won't recommend others do it either. I still wouldn't care if every single incel had been predestined to being some insane paranoiac sexist by forces far beyond their comprehension. I just simply don't care about them or their plight. Not at all. Certainly not enough to feel compelled to shift my time and attention to them vis-a-vis political organizing. On this sort of point, if anyone disagrees with me, I think we're just at an impasse. Agree to disagree or don't. Either way, the next thing EdgierThanThou brings up is the way I'm pretty generally dismissive of incels' claims that making friends or finding a partner is hard. They pull up some data and lean on that to basically say I'm wrong to be kind of glib about what I would describe as the non-issue of people having difficulty making friends. Take a look. Most people are actually doing fine socially.
No, we are not. Thank you very much. Of course, unlike this person, I've actually got a little bit of evidence to support my disagreement. According to one study, linked below, covering social engagement from 2003 to 2020, people are spending an average of 300 more hours per year socially isolated in 2020 than they were in 2003. Note, one, that this trend began before the pandemic, and two, that these graphs might be a bit weird to read, so I would recommend just checking out the actual study instead of parroting what I'm saying here. Here's a survey. People have fewer friends now. They're more depressed. This claim is genuinely laughable. Good for you that your social life is doing fantastic. I'm having a pretty good time of it too at the moment. That's far from the universal experience, though.
I think pulling up the graphs here was probably the best possible way to argue against me. It is, after all, ostensibly hard data, and these graphs do seem to have come from a legit enough source. But I still disagree with both the premise of these graphs and the point they're being used to make. Firstly, it's good to acknowledge that yes, this data is pre-pandemic, and that's no small thing. But even still, post-pandemic, I don't think people, by and large, have fewer friends and social connections than they once did, even if they think that's the case, and even if that's what these graphs supposedly show. EdgierThanThou's data here purports to show that people today report having fewer friends and self-report less social satisfaction than people did in decades prior. I think you can pretty easily write that off as an effect of the times we live in, but not necessarily the actual facts of how sociable people are or aren't these days. For one thing, material conditions throughout much of the world is just worse in several particular ways. Sure, we've got a whole heap of technological advancements that we've got since the 90s, 70s, 50s, however far back you want to go to make the comparison. No one's doubting that. But at the same time, people statistically are working longer hours for comparatively less pay and benefits. 50 years ago, if you had almost any above-board job, regardless of whether or not you lived in a big city or regardless of whether or not you had a university degree, if you had a job, you could comfortably afford a place to live and have a social life, and probably at least start a family of modest means relatively young. Nowadays, you might have just as many friends as the average somebody in the 70s had, and you have a job and you could technically start a family any time. But realistically, the money simply isn't there. The rent's much harder to cover, luxuries and socializing out on the town is just way more expensive. It's not a lack of friends or friendship, it's the fact that you and all your friends' lives suck. And how you can overcome that sort of feeling is an entirely different topic I might like to get into at some point. But the other thing I want to mention is that if you look at a graph purporting to show self-reported loneliness among adults, say since 1950 to now, it looks again like people are way more friendless today. But even just going off the raw data, even if you control for stuff like the cost of living shooting way up, I still think you'd be missing why the data may appear to show that. People are just more likely to report being lonely now because of how much more openly mental health topics are discussed today, for one thing. Same goes for any sort of mental stuff. Autism, schizophrenia, PTSD, depression. It's not that all this stuff came out of nowhere in the latter half of the 20th century and now seemingly heaps of people have it. It's just that only recently have we started acknowledging this stuff openly. The same could be said of left-handedness or being transgender. I would be willing to wager that, roughly, the percentage of people who would honestly describe themselves as chronically lonely and unable to find an intimate partner in the 1950s would actually be the same amount as today. Which again is to say, it would be an absolute minority of people if everyone was being honest. It's just that nowadays, you can honestly complain about being lonely far more easily and loudly. On the internet, for instance. Whereas 70-odd years ago, if you told someone you think all women are secretly conspiring against you to deny you affection like an incel might, either your doctor would start prescribing you increasingly large fistfuls of amphetamines until you stop thinking that, or whoever you're complaining to will resolutely tell you it's probably your own damn fault for being a pinko commie sympathizer or something. That's why people used to be less open about their feelings back in the day. But also, even if you did want to take the graphs here at complete face value, I still don't put any stock in the idea that people today are just being compelled to not have any friends by powers totally outside their control. Frankly, if you don't have the social circle or intimate partner you think you want, that's a self-made problem. You have exactly as many friends and acquaintances and lovers as you want. And if you think that's not true, you're deluding yourself. If you're in the typical incel demographic, young, restless, male age 18 to 35, you actually have the easiest social conditions possible, whether you admit it to yourself or not. I'm going to essentially reiterate something I said in the last video I did, because it's still correct. You live among other people, whether you're in a town, a city, a suburb, whatever. You've got a device that can contact anyone else in the world instantly in your pocket all the time. And if you can comprehend the words I'm saying, you are mentally capable of talking to people. You choose your lifestyle. Fundamentally, if you're a young man who chooses to stay in, chooses to be antisocial, chooses not to meet people, you are entirely responsible for being friendless. And as an ardently progressive leftist, I'm not going to sit here and moralize to young men who do choose a life of being sedentary recluses, who choose media consumption and pornography over having any actual relationships, that they aren't allowed to do it. I do believe, after all, you are free to live your life that way if you really want. But don't cry about the fact that that's the life you chose. If you really wanted more friends, or a partner, or a different life, you would do the very simple things like going out sometime that get you those outcomes. Now, my sincere apologies to the sole sort of exception to that rule, the 0.01% of people with severe mobility issues, or a really bad obvious intellectual disability, or some sort of boy in the bubble type syndrome. Those sorts of people, unfortunately, can't so easily just choose to make friends or decide what sort of life they want to live. But everyone else can. Plus, there is another particular reason I want to keep hammering home the fact that virtually everyone does choose what their social life looks like. Because I know that a significantly above average percentage of the people who will ever see a video with the word incel in the title, like this one, are incels who obsessively search for new incel content. I know they're watching the videos I've put out on the topic in the past, at the very least, given how many of them end up emailing or messaging me about them, sounding very angry and or upset with what I have to say. But here's the thing. I admittedly do kind of like the idea of riling them up on purpose. It's harmless fun. It's certainly not harming me, and I'm having fun. I like tapping the fish tank. And besides, incels aren't an oppressed minority. They're a perfectly valid target in my eyes. And perhaps more importantly, they're very easy to mock, so I'm not going to stop doing it. But I do want to get this video back on track, and talk about one more major point of disagreement I have with EdgierThanThou's response video. And it's possibly my biggest single disagreement with it. Towards the end of their video, ETT says this.
There's a common line that progressives use as kind of a litmus test for reactionary ideology. Essentially, you're instructed to ask a person if they think that some people are just better than others. If they say yes, then they're a reactionary, and if they say no, they're probably not. I don't think it's perfect. People can lie, after all. But this person is just straight up admitting that that's what they think, that some people are just fundamentally intolerable.
I had to cut this down a little for brevity, but I think I've kept the fundamentals of their argument intact here. What I'm hearing here is that you think either that progressives don't think some people are better in some moral sense than others, or that progressives ought not to think some people are better in some moral sense than others. Am I right? Because if so, I'm a die-hard, dyed-in-the-wool progressive, and I definitely think some people are better than others. This sounds like some really weird Socratic meta-ethics gotcha, and I just don't buy it, like at all. Even if we put the question of where the self-described incels are on our morality scale aside for a moment here, I definitely think there are good people and bad people. If you do bad things, you are worse morally than people who don't do those bad things. There's a type of person in the world called a bad person, and if there weren't any of those people, the world would be good. It's not a magical intrinsic quality of your being. Like, I'm not some Calvinist who believes that at the moment of your conception or whatever, that God personally wrote good or bad on your soul forever. Bad people can redeem themselves and become good. I do believe in rehabilitation. And theoretically, anyone who is good can start making a lot of bad choices and fall from grace. But there are still good people and bad people. Good and bad are definitely discrete moral categories that people can be labelled into. And obviously, good people are better than bad people. Is that moral framework necessarily perfect? Who can say? It's just my intuition. But I bet a lot of people would basically agree with me here. I don't look at Hitler and Bob Ross and go, well, if you think about it, they were both products of their circumstances, so they're morally the same. No, some people are just bad. And frankly, if you think otherwise, you've overthought yourself into having a very nonsensible idea. Even if you wheel out the best possible argument here, that all people are morally equal in some cosmic sense, I still disagree. I think some people are good and some people are bad. I even get the whole pseudo-zen total ego-death thing about how people aren't intrinsically good or bad, and the almost Stirner-esque thing of morality is made up and good and bad are social constructs or whatever. I get it, and I disagree with it. But, really getting back to the incel-centric part of this disagreement here, I think being an incel is bad. It's a bad thing, and it's a bad mindset. It is, in my view, a morally worse thing to be an incel than to not be an incel. And both my sympathy for made-up problems and my physical capacity to do things in the world is limited, so helping incels, bad people, isn't on my list of priorities. And yeah, I know, as a progressive, I do want the best for almost everyone, broadly speaking. Yada yada yada, insert class consciousness lefty theory here. Any large-scale, proper left-wing revolutionary world would be better for all, except the 1% parasites currently at the top or whatever. But right here and now, actual progressive organising basically means boots-on-the-ground material work. And I've got a long list of priorities, and realistically incels aren't ever going to be my focus. You'd be better off trying to fix almost any other problem. And to say you'd be better off doing literally almost anything else than helping incels is to implicitly say not to do the incel outreach. So I'm sticking with that line of thinking. And while we're remaining on track talking about incels here, these young men whose whole pseudo-political identity revolves around a lack of getting pussy, I'm not going to help them with that any more than just telling them maybe they should try talking to a chick sometime. It's not like any sort of mutual aid thing where if people need food or water or medication or bedding or petty cash, I can just arrange to get them those things. You can't hand out a free sex life to people in a church basement every other Thursday. And hell, even if you could, I wouldn't. If you're a terminally online 16-year-old boy who's worried about not having sex because you watch too much manosphere stuff on the internet, realistically, if you wait at most a couple years, that problem will probably figure itself out. And that's about all I think really needs to be said. Shame it took me 3,000 words to get to this point. Anyway, I do still want to sincerely thank the channel that made the video I've been responding to here, EdgierThanThou. Respond back or don't. I don't think I would. I think the topic's really been exhausted at this point, and I feel we're at a sort of agree to disagree impasse, like I said. But I still wanted to say what I said today, and I think a short, respectful response like this deserves one back in kind. Anyone who's been following my videos as of late knows that I think there is a right way and a wrong way for a larger YouTube page to engage with a smaller one. And I do try to do things the right way. So again, I'll be linking this other smaller channel and their video in the description below. If you're a viewer of mine, and you've made it this far, you can bow out now to go check out their channel. See you next time. Have a lovely day. But, just speaking with my respondent here, lefty to lefty, I'm fascinated by that username, EdgierThanThou, because you'd see that name and go in expecting someone who's going to be really contrarian and mean and stuff. But if anything, you seemed really sincere and like you were trying to be, in a word, kind. And that's admirable, it really is. But sometimes, taking the kindest possible approach isn't the best or the most practical option. Occasionally, especially in the world of real political organising, you need to know when to be unkind and when to withhold kindness for your own sake. If you treat the reactionaries and the racists and the sexists and the incels and the grifters and the libs with open arms all the time, they're just not going to learn. And making that effort to show them that kindness is only going to waste your time without moving the needle an inch. Think about it like this. Let's say you're out driving one evening, and you accidentally run over a possum. You look back, and he's not in a good way. He's wheezing out his last right there on the asphalt. Some would say the kindest thing to do would be to go back, pull over, scoop him up, and take him to a veterinarian, even if it's only to euthanize the poor guy. Some would say the most practical thing you could do would be to go back, pull over, and put him out of his misery quickly yourself with, like, the tire iron you keep in the boot. I would say the correct thing to do is to keep driving, because that dying possum ain't my fucking problem. And if I'm driving somewhere, like, say, towards the horizon of a political project, it's because I want to get there. And I'm not going to waste time stopping to grieve over every little jumped up rat I might accidentally crush along the way.